Welcome to another episode of Theological Pipe. News, culture, sports, politics, and everything else from a theological perspective.
It's all summed up in love.
What should I do? Tell me. God is good. Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, give me peace. Give me peace.
Put that in your theological pipe and smoke it.
Welcome to another episode of Theological Pipe. If you're on YouTube, man, click the subscribe button, the comment button, the like button on Google, Apple, Spotify, any other podcast app. Click subscribe. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about voting, or we're going to vote today, but we're going to vote about something completely different and completely divorced from politics. I said over the past few podcasts I was trying to stay away from politics and be more positive, and then yesterday did something about voting, it was kind of more, it wasn't really geared towards the vote or who you were voting for or why. But today I want to do something a little different. We're going to vote, and we're going to vote. And if you want to vote on YouTube, I have more people, I think, listening on Google and Apple and Spotify. But if you are watching on YouTube and you want to vote, knock yourself out, put it in the comments. But we're going to vote on the best, and this is going to be out of left field, and I'll explain why we're doing this, the best album from 1987. And I know that goes back for some people, but man, I was watching, and I think it was the Professor of Rock. I think he does a podcast where he interviews people. He talks about songs. He talks about groups. He talks about albums. He talks about times. And he was doing something with somebody who had an album in 87, and he started listing off all these great albums that had come out in 87. And I was like blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a classic. That's a classic. That's a classic. And this is in just 1 year. And I was thinking, man, and I am one of those guys, those older guys that, things were better back in my day. But I don't think there's any question that music was better back in the day, back in the 80s and the 90s and the 70s and the 60s and the 50s. I mean, you look at those decades, they were incredible decades. And I think music is suffering now just because it's prepackaged and pre-programmed and auto-tune. And I'm not saying there's not talent out there today. There is. But when I saw the list, I said, well, let me look at other albums in 87. And I have a list here of some of the best albums that came out. And every one of these albums, I'm going to list them real quick and then kind of go through them. And what I want to do is give you a chance and give me a chance to think, if you had to pick one album from 1987 that was the best album of 1987, which would it be? And maybe why? But let me read you this list. And as I read it, just remember, all of these albums came out in 1987. These are some of the best albums of all time, and they all came out in 87. So I'm going to go In Excess, came out Kick, their album Kick, the best album they've ever put out, but In Excess, Kick. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. U2, The Joshua Tree. Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer. Whitney Houston, it was called Whitney, her self-titled album, Whitney. Prince, Sign of the Times. Michael Jackson came out with Bad, his follow-up to Thriller. Def Leppard with Hysteria. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. R.E.M., Document. George Michael, Faith. The La Bamba soundtrack. The Dirty Dancing soundtrack. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And as I was reading that list, I would have been 17 at the time. I was in high school. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's some incredible, diverse, amazing music that has withstood the test of time. And so I'm going to mention a few of the albums, kind of go through them again and kind of give you the highs and the lows. And as you're listening to it, just ask yourself, would that be considered your best album of 87? And again, some of these albums, in my opinion, are some of the best albums of all time. So the fact that they all came out in 87, what an incredible year for music 1987 was. So let's start off with In Excess, Kick. Again, an amazing album. I don't know how many top 10 singles that were on there, but New Sensation, Devil Inside, Never Tear Us Apart. You can go, the album is great from start to finish. It's a great album. Michael Hutchence was one of the greatest frontmen for a rock band that there ever has been. I know he's pop rock, but he was an incredible singer, incredible band, and that album really was... It was incredible. It was a great album. And just think that was 87. And then go to Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. Guns N' Roses exploded onto the scene with that album. Sweet Child of Mine, Welcome to the Jungle, and Mr. Brownstone. I can list all of those songs as well. Say what you will about what they became and how the infighting, caused their downfall. But Appetite for Destruction, man, that was a slap in the face to some of the music in '87. And it was a great album, and something that's up there still. It still holds some sway. And if you listen to it, it's a great album. U2, Joshua Tree. Unbelievable, right? I mean, U2 is one of the greatest bands in the history of music, as far as I'm concerned. One of my favorites. A few years ago, I got was able to go to Dallas and to Jerry World, and the U2 was on tour. They were doing the 30th anniversary of the release of the Joshua Tree, and they played the entire album, and it was probably one of the greatest concerts I've ever been to. And that album is just phenomenal. Like, it put U2 on another level. They were a great band before that, but that album was the one that just kind of put them into the stratosphere. And so Joshua Tree is just one of the greatest albums with some of the greatest songs ever written. Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Bon Jovi. I'm not a huge fan of that genre of music, but you got to give them props with that song and what they put out in '87. Whitney Houston, one of the greatest singers of all time. It's a shame what happened to her. She struggled with drug addiction and stuff like that, but it is a great album, and it's got some great pop songs on it. Again, not my go-to genre, but you have to give props where props is due, and she is one of the greatest singers in the world, and probably has the standard when it comes to renditions of the Star Spangled Banner, which happened. But Whitney Houston is great. Then there's Prince, Sign of the Times. My vote for the greatest Prince album of all time, and therefore that puts it in a category of one of the greatest albums of all time, because Prince is just a genius. And Sign of the Times is an amazing, amazing album from start to finish again. And we'll talk a little bit about that one. Michael Jackson's Bad. Not as good as Thriller, in my opinion, and maybe not even as good as Off the Wall, but Bad is a good album. It's got tons of hits. The impact, again, Michael Jackson was pretty much at the top of the world at this time, and an amazing album. Def Leppard, Hysteria. Not a big fan of Def Leppard from this point on. Photograph, when they were in that era. Pyromania, that's where that's the album Photograph was off of. Pyromania was a great album. Hysteria, it's a good album. It's got good songs. They're catchy. You don't forget them. If you listen to them now, you know them. Just a little too poppy and a little too formulaic, but it worked. So I'm not criticizing them for doing it. But it was an amazing, huge album at the time, and with so many top 10 hits. REM, Document, again, an album that was put out by a band that kind of launched them into a different stratosphere of what they were doing. REM, Document, one of my favorite albums, again, of all time. Love the band. And again, before that, you had Murmur and other, Fables of the Reconstruction, all these different albums. But Document was just enough of mainstream, but just enough of alternative to be really, really different, really, really cool. George Michael and Faith, again, I don't want to say an underrated album, but that album from start to finish is just nails. It's so many good songs, so many different genres of songs. George Michael is one of the greatest singers that we've ever had, and it's an incredible album. And then you go to the soundtracks, La Bamba and Dirty Dancing, again, just an amazing, again, that's just a partial list. 1987, In Excess, Kick, Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, U2, The Joshua Tree, Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer, Whitney Houston, Whitney, Prince, Sign of the Times, Michael Jackson's Bad, Def Leppard, Hysteria, REM, Document, George Michael, Faith, La Bamba, Dirty Dancing, and on and on and on. 1987, and I'm going to try to do a little research when I'm bored. With this COVID stuff, you're kind of not going out as much. So maybe I'll do some other research and find out if maybe there was another year that could be comparable to this. But this is an unreal list of albums that, again, if I said, could you put some of these albums on a top 50 list of the greatest albums of all time? Yes. Well, yes. And yes, and of course you can, and yes, and this is just from '87, just an amazing year for music. So for me, and this is more personal, but also I think impact music-wise. I was like, okay, if I had to pick one album from this list to be the top album from 1987, and I'm not talking about commercially. I'm not talking about which one sold the most copies. That would probably be Michael Jackson, or had the most top 10 singles, Hysteria or Faith or something like that. But for me, what is the best album in terms of commercial impact, musical impact, the way the person put the album out, the songs on the album, the breadth and the depth and everything that comes from music? Which album would be up there? And I picked three. And these are my three. There's probably a fourth. I'll do the honorable mention for me is Faith by George Michael. And this is not my style. I was not a fan of Wham back in the day, right? I was a, rock and roll, hard rock, whatever kind of guy you want to talk about. Van Halen, Sammy Hagar, those guys. And all of a sudden, George Michael, when I heard Faith for the first time, saw it on MTV, the music video, and I'm like, he's... Look at him, he's trying to be, appeal to teenage girls. But then when the song started and the chords started strumming, I was like, that's pretty cool. And then you listen to the song, and I was able to say, you know what? Even though I'm not a George Michael fan at the time, I was like, that's a really good song. And then I heard Father Figure, and then I heard One More Try, and then you heard Kissing a Fool. And then you heard, song after song after song on that album. It's like, man, this is a good song. Man, this is a good song. Man, this is a good song. So props to George Michael for changing who he was in Wham, a teeny bopper, boy band, to going to being more serious with music, and an incredible album. And it just continued. Listen Without Prejudice was next, and Older, and other albums that he had out. But man, Faith was a great album with so many great songs, so many different genres. And George Michael was one of the greatest vocalists that we had. I just was impressed with it. And even though I wasn't a big fan of George Michael and Wham, huge fan of Faith, and became a George Michael fan after that. So that would be my honorable mention, right, just outside the top three. And on maybe on another day, I might put it at top, number 3 or number 2. But for me, the next one, I'm probably going to put In Excess and Kick, simply because of where I was and because I love that album. When it started out with Guns in the Sky, New Sensation, I remember when that song came out, I liked the guitar part, the way it was played kind of high on the neck. And, Michael Hutchence was cool, and he was a great front man, and the band was cool. And even though they were a cool band, they weren't your typical looking band. Michael Hutchence was, like a sex symbol back in the day, but the rest of the band just looked like a bunch of nerds, and just a bunch of regular dudes playing music, but they were cool and they had good sound. And that album, the reason I don't put it up any higher and why it may even fall down, it was just because of the commercial success of it. Kind of, to me, takes away from it. And I know that's kind of weird to say, but it was produced so well. It was put together so well. They knew what they were doing, but it's a great album. And again, there's not really a weak song on that album from start to finish. Even the songs that didn't come out as singles, there were great songs. There's a song on the album called Tiny Daggers, which is one of my favorite In Excess songs ever. Mystify. They just have some. It's just a great album. So In Excess would be the third one. And then so when it came to these two, I'm going to put one at number 2 that probably would be number 1 for most people, I think, based on just the impact and the long-lasting career that they've had and stuff. But for me, the number 2 album is U2's Joshua Tree, and it probably should be number 1 if we're going to get down to it. But for me, it's number 2, and it was an album that, again, for me, just put U2 at a different level. I was a big fan of U2 and liked who they were, Sunday Bloody Sunday, and their albums, Boy and War and all that kind of stuff. But then when the Joshua Tree came out, it was just different. It was spiritual. It was ethereal. There was something else behind it. Even when I went to the concert, I felt like I was at a Christian worship service in addition to being at a rock concert. And you don't get that at a lot. You get that at some. I mean, it's a moment, and there's a different feeling when you go to see live music, and when everyone's buying into it, you do have like that shared experience. But with U2 and with that album, and I think it was proven when I went to see him in concert, it just seemed like it was deeper. It just seemed like there was something else there besides just a bunch of people liking music. People were liking music on a different level. And I think the content of the songs and the message in the songs added to it, because there was some spiritual elements in a lot of the lyrics that Bono wrote and still writes. So I can't say enough about U2's Joshua Tree. And again, being able to see them a few years ago on their 30th anniversary of the release of that album and listen to them play the whole album was just, again, an incredible experience. So I put that as my number 2, because for me, my number 1 is Prince's Sign of the Times. And again, I consider that one of the greatest albums of all time from anybody. And I know, Purple Rain was more popular, and there were other albums that other people would probably like, or he had great albums, Diamonds and Pearls, and the Batman soundtrack and stuff like that. But Sign of the Times was such an incredible album, again, from start to finish. And if you want rock and roll, if you want funk, if you want ballads, if you want pop, if you want jazz, if you want, and not only if you want that type of music, but if you want the instruments to sound incredible and the musicianship to be beyond top notch, then Sign of the Times has it. And the amazing thing about Sign of the Times, it was recorded by Prince, and he basically did everything on the album. There's a live track of It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, but the rest of it, when you hear the guitar, it's Prince. When you hear the bass, it's Prince. When you hear the drums, it's Prince. When you hear the keyboards, it's Prince. The dude was phenomenal on every single instrument. And that album is just, again, from start to finish, the lyrical contact, the message of the songs, the seriousness, the fun, everything about that album was incredible from start to finish. And for me, when I look at 1987, if I had to pick one album that encapsulated music at the time and still withstands the test of time and is amazing from start to finish and hits every genre, it's Sign of the Times. That's how great Prince was. And the cool part about Prince is, people are now, when he died, I think it was last year, it's been a year now, even though people know he's a genius, even though he's one of the top artists of all time, and he gets the respect, I think it put him on another level, because people started saying, oh my gosh, and people started sharing videos, and other songs started coming out, and people started seeing things, and he's just on another level. And for me, the part that I really enjoyed was watching people's reaction when Prince played the guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps at that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame benefit. It was Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne and George Harrison's son, and they're all sitting there playing, and Prince is kind of off in the background, and then it comes to the guitar solo, and Prince comes out and just nails it. And if you have time, go to YouTube, Prince Rock and Roll, Prince While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and you'll just be amazed, because he just nails the guitar solo and proves to everyone that, you know what, not only can the dude write and dance and sing and be an icon, but he can shred on the guitar. And in my opinion, he's one of the best guitar players that ever lived, in addition to being an incredible musician, incredible songwriter, incredible performer, a guy that just does did incredible things. And so for me, in 1987, out of all the albums I listed, Prince, Sign of the Times, that's my vote for the number 1 album of 1987. So, I'm gonna read them again. So if you have a comment, and you can comment on YouTube if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, put your comment down there. Say, this is the album I would pick as the best of all time. Tell me where I'm wrong, and I'm wrong. I know some people that are more hard rock would probably put Appetite for Destruction, and I wouldn't argue with you. And I know people that may be more pop inclined may say Michael Jackson's Bad or George Michael's Faith, and I would even argue I should have put REM higher up because of what they meant to me, but anyway, I vote for Sign of the Times, and I think this is a more fun vote than having to choose between President Trump or former Vice President Biden, and I think it's more fun at the end because we can just kind of talk, and so again, if you're watching on YouTube, put a comment in there, but again, most of you are listening, so just think about it. Best album from 1987, In Excess Kick. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. U2, The Joshua Tree. Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer. Whitney Houston, Whitney. Prince, Sign of the Times, my vote. Michael Jackson, Bad. Def Leppard, Hysteria. REM, Document. George Michael, Faith. The La Bamba soundtrack. The Dirty Dancing soundtrack. Again, so many. There's other 80. Maybe I missed one. Maybe there's another album that came out in 87 that you know about, and you say, how could you not include this? And you'd probably be right. Maybe I'll change my vote. But man, music is one of those things that's such a gift, and it's such an amazing thing to sit back and remember and think about these albums that I got to listen to when they came out. And maybe you're not that old. Maybe you're not that old, and you discovered them now, and that's cool too. So 87 top album for me, Prince. Sign of the Times. I don't know that this is a theological pipe moment. I don't know how I can kind of tie this into there is a God, but I thank God for you. How about that? Thank God for music. Thank God that there's music that we can listen to and discuss and feel the passion and the emotions, and it can take us away, and it can soothe us, and it can heal us, and it can help us feel better, and it can help us get out our aggressions. And so music is a gift from God. So how about that? Put that in your theological pipe and smoke it. Hope everything's going okay. Have a good weekend, and we will see you next time. Be nice.
Well, bye.